7 o'clock. Planning Commission is called to order. Stand for Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Take roll call. Starting to my right.
Commissioner Collins, present.
Commissioner Souza, present.
Commissioner Ham here.
Commissioner McNair here.
Commissioner Mader here.
Commissioner Juniman here.
Commissioner Cooper here.
The quorum is present. First item is consent agenda. All matters listed within the consent agenda have been distributed to each member of the Planning Commission for study. These items are considered to be routine and will be enacted upon by one motion with no separate discussion. If separate discussion is desired on an item from either the Planning Commission or the floor, that item may be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. Are there any members of the commission that would like to have any items removed from the agenda?
Chair McNair, I would like to have the minutes of the meeting on September 25th moved from the consent agenda to the regular agenda. I have a update. Correction,
Okay.
I should say, that needs to be made within the minutes.
We'll put that as a second agenda item then.
Or we can do it first.
Okay.
However, can we do it
We
first?
can do it first?
Okay.
Okay. Then we'll go to that. Is there anybody on the floor that would like to have changes made to the consent agenda? Then we'll move into the,
Do I need to make a motion to have that item placed? And we need a second, right? Okay, so I'd like to make a motion that we move the standing approval of the minutes as written for the meeting on September 25th, 2023 to the regular agenda item number 1.
Second.
motion is from Commissioner Mader and Commissioner Hand, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Same sign. The motion passes 7-0. That would be item number 1.
Item number 1, does he need to introduce the item, or can we just go right into it? We can just go right into it. Okay, so within the commission discussion that we had last meeting, there is a correction that needs to be made. Chair Mader is no longer applicable. Chair Mader stated that ground-mounted solar systems, if you look at page 2, it's the second to last paragraph, that needs to reflect Commissioner Mader and not Chair. So with that, can I move forward with the motion that we approve the minutes for the meeting on September 25th, 2023 with the correction as noted by staff?
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Mader and second by Commissioner Judeman. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Regular agenda item number 1. The Bellows at Ash and Anvil, project number CUP 23-305-06. Do we have a presentation?
Good evening.
Good evening.
Oh.
Oh, good evening.
Big greeting.
Again, it's item 1 is conditional use permit. The conditional use permit is for the approval of a permit to allow Bellows event stage for live music next to the Ash and Anvil site that's located downtown at 204 East Park Street, or it might also be the address of 117 South Elm Street as well. So some examples of recreation and entertainment minor is what they're going for, are like driving ranges, miniature golf, again, small band shells or amphitheater, which we feel this fell within. The small outdoor stage requires a conditional use permit in the C1 Central Business District. And it is, however, it is allowed in all other commercial districts here within the city. But under the C1, basically, which is our downtown district, it does require a conditional use permit. Subject property is basically located right at the north east corner of Elm and Park Street. It's the lot area is right around 10,000 square feet, and the outdoor stage that they're wanting to put up is located on the very northeast corner of this site. As you can see from the existing zoning ordinance, this property is surrounded by C1 commercial. However, it does have some R5 multifamily just to the south and east of the subject site. The applicant is estimating around 80 customers for live events. Parking requirements within the central business district is exempt. And as you can see, there is parking located on both sides of Park Street and extending down and to the east, and also all along Elm. Staff findings that the proposed use complies with the Gardner Land Development Code, as well as the City of Gardner Comprehensive Plan and the Main Street Corridor Plan. Conditional use permit review criteria have been addressed by the applicant. These reviews are available within the staff report. Staff recommends the Plan Commission recommend approval of 23-305-06, a conditional use permit for recreation/entertainment minor at 204 East Park Street with conditions provided in the recommended motion.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions? Any questions from commission?
I do have a question. So it says east of subject property, it's C1 Central Business District, but they're single-family homes. So I was confused about that.
So in a lot of the older portions of Gardner, as well as many other cities, there's zoning that does not necessarily match with the actual land uses. So understand what Bob was referring to in his presentation was the zoning category that we have. So those properties would be able to redevelop under the C commercial district zoning category for the downtown central business district. So that's something to just remember. They could go to business uses underneath that zoning without rezoning the property at all. Whereas the ones that were in the R5 category, I think that Bob had referred to there, those, if they were to go commercial from residential uses, would have to go through a rezoning process to do that. So you may or may not see changes there, but those rights were granted through the zoning code, even though those are residential uses. In some cases, those residential uses would be considered non-conforming and have legal status under those non-conforming rights that are in the code, unless they wish to expand or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm gonna have some questions, but I'd like to see if maybe some of them are answered if the applicant has a presentation, but I do have some questions, but I'd like to maybe see if there's more information first.
Okay. Does the applicant want to make a presentation?
Hey, my name is Derek Stockton. I'm the owner of the Ashland Anvil and one of the owners of Ashland Anvil and the Bellows, and soon to be the Speakeasy Bar. It's going to be called the Forge. That's all in the same location down there. I didn't make a fancy presentation, but what we're trying to do here is bring people in downtown, try to bring a community together. Just in our cigar shop, we've been open just over a year, and we've seen that we've done that. We've brought people together. We're bringing in people from out of town, and we are creating a sense of community in that area. Gardner doesn't really have anything where there's consistent entertainment. Like there's really not a place in Gardner that does it consistently. I grew up here in town. I went to school here. I've lived here most of my life. And that's always something that I thought Gardner could use. My wife and I, we travel out of town to go watch live music. We've gone to the Bull Creek Distillery in Spring Hill a few times, and we've traveled to downtown Kansas City. But between here and downtown Kansas City, there's really not a whole lot of places to go to have this sort of live music, entertainment stuff going on. So that's kind of what we're trying to do here. We are in a residential area, so we want to be very respectful of our neighbors. So, on our application, we put that we'd be done by 10 p.m. every night. We're not going to be out late. We're not trying to have big, loud rock concerts, and that's not the environment we're trying to promote. Really, what we're trying to do is promote communication and community. And if you've been in our shop, in our cigar shop, you'll see that it's really set up to really promote that communication. It's set up in seating pods, and it's so cool to see customers come together who've never met each other, and by the end of the night they're hugging and exchanging phone numbers and planning their next time to meet up, and we want to continue that sort of environment outside. So it's going to be fairly low volume, done early. We want to really keep that communication aspect viable out there where we can have conversation. It's going to be fairly low volume music. One of the things that we're doing that we're proposing to do to help keep the sound from traveling too far is to kind of stay away from that low frequency, the heavy bass music that you can often hear driving down the road. That type of sound is non-directional, meaning it doesn't matter how you point the speaker. That thumping that you hear happens non-directional. It's broadcast in every direction. But staying away from that low bass and going with the more higher frequency, think, I don't know, jazz or country western or stuff like that, where it's not a whole lot of that loud, low bass. That sound is directional, meaning we can face the speakers a certain way and more or less contain the sound. And it's not perfect. You're going to hear it outside of the property boundary, but again, we're keeping the volume low and we're keeping it done by a reasonable time at night. So at least that's the plan. So yeah, I think that's all.
Thank you.
Care for questions?
Any questions, commissioners? Questions for the?
Yeah, I do. Maybe now is the appropriate time to ask questions, or this kind of question specifically. But as it relates to the conditional use permit, we obviously have the obligation to make our stance this evening. Should that be approved and/or so I understand what our approval means? Are there multiple businesses here? And would the conditional use permit be for all of them or just the Bellows? What does that structure look like?
So that is a good question. At the end of the day, you're correct. This is only for the outdoor entertainment recreational aspect of this property. So it does not necessarily have anything to do with the Ash and Anvil aspect that is inside the building itself. They're interconnected in the sense that the buildings do have entry-exit points or the other businesses have those entry-exit points into this outdoor space, and they're utilized. There'll be customers that will utilize back and forth out of that. But as far as the actual CUP, it will refer to this activity in particular. So that was why he kind of gave you the idea of the different uses that are there. Ash and Anvil is not under consideration here, nor is the Forge that was referred to by the applicant. Those are indoor businesses that are allowed in this zoning district by right within the confines of those business operations. In this particular case, because of the outdoor venue, the entertainment aspect of this, it's required to have a conditional use permit to operate.
And this may be very, or too much in the weeds, but again, I just want to understand the structure of what the decision. But obviously in reading, it's not covered, or the area is not covered, which is great. It's a beautiful area, by the way. If there was a storm and ever there be a moment to move the live music inside, is again, it's really splitting hairs and
just from the standpoint of moving things inside. So indoor entertainment's allowed by business, right? So that's not an issue there. The issue would become occupancy concerns. So, and that's a fire code issue and some other things that have to operate there. So we can go into more detail about that through the discussion after you have your public hearing. But that's why one of the conditions about the occupancy limits being posted and things like that, that was a requirement of the fire district, that we have that at least displayed on the building near the entries so that there's a way to understand how is this working, and if it's an overcrowding situation, that gives the fire marshal the opportunity to say, hey, we've got to shut it down or stop the event until we get within those limits and parameters. So,
Appreciate it.
but we can talk more about that in later discussion.
First part of that answered my question, so thank you for the clarity.
Anyone else? Mr. Souza?
I'm familiar with the Gardner Development Code, but I was looking for the Main Street corridor plan. Where is it located?
It is posted on the website. So you have that, and you also have the downtown vision plan. They're both on the websites. I can get you links to those, as you need to, or I can get that out to the total commission tomorrow.
Okay.
I'll save the rest of my questions for after the public hearing.
Same, yeah, I'll always love to hear.
This is a public hearing item, so we'll move towards the public hearing now. We need a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Commissioner Ham, second by Commissioner Judeman. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're going to open the public hearing. Each person is allowed 5 minutes. Please state your name and address. And if there's a group being represented, that presenter may have 7 minutes.
Hello, my name's Scott Miller. Been a resident of Gardner for 19 years. Been going down to the Ash and Anvil almost every day for the last little over a year. One thing that I've helped do is install all the speakers outside in the outdoor area. Now, the speakers I may have installed, but they were designed by Mr. Derek Stockton. One thing that I think got missed over, maybe due to nerves or whatever, not accusing him of anything bad. When people hear live music, I bet you have an understanding in your mind. You think, oh gosh, big amplifiers. If you're too close to the speakers, you have to yell to be heard by your friend. And that's not the case here. I would like for you to look at your ceiling and count how many speakers are in your ceiling. Do you think it's too loud for anyone to hear where each individual can hear my voice, but it's not so deafening that you can have a conversation between each other? There's exactly 12 speakers in the ceiling in this room. There's 12 speakers outside at the forge, and they're designed in a way that they're turned down low enough where that anyone can have a voice without having to raise their voice conversation and still hear the music and be pleasant. That was Derek Stockton's idea. It worked out very well. He's got his system tuned so that it can't be turned too loud. And I think the law says between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. is that the correct noise levels to a reasonable person. This guy's setting it up right. He's got the right genre of music that is not offensive. And yes, there is no boom and bass that disturbs the neighbors. This is a frequency that is pleasant for people to hear. This is something that we worked together on and tested, and it works. I don't know if you all have got that vision in your mind, but please look at the speakers you have in the ceiling and listen to the volume that you're hearing now. That's the volume that's there, only it's pleasant music. That's all I have to say. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate you, and I thank you all very much for doing what you do.
Sir, just briefly, would you
Yes, sir.
your address for the record? We have everyone that speaks has to give their full address.
Since I'm deaf, please speak up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Would you give your full address? Sorry, I'm not using the speakers you talked about.
My address is 835 North Spruce Street, Gardner, Kansas.
Thank you very much.
66030.
Appreciate that.
I live in Genesis Creek. Thanks, sir.
Hello, I'm Chuck Lawrence. I live at 15500 Lake Road 4 in Gardner, and I own the property at 213 East Park Street, which would be just right across the street from the outdoor venue. And my in-laws live there, Ron and Alice Richardson. And we love the place. We've been there. We've gone there for football games, sat outside and watched the games. We've got to know some people, met some people we didn't know, and have seen people from out of town come. So I don't see any reason why we wouldn't want to go ahead with this. And my in-laws don't have any problems with it. I'm kind of came here representing them since they can't get out very well. And that's pretty much all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Guess if no one else wants to step up. I'm Bill Sutton, 215 West Park Street. I'm not here in my official capacity in any way. I'm really here as a member of Park Street, a resident of Park Street who I'll admit to a little bit of bias here. I do enjoy a cigar every once in a while. And Ashen Anvil is a fantastic place to go enjoy a cigar. I've only been there once when they were having live music. That was an acoustic band, acoustic guitar. Probably not going to create a lot of noise complaints there. But I understand there was a jazz ensemble there. I was out of town. I didn't get to take part in that one. But I would encourage you. My original thought was to recommend a path forward if there were concerns. But I'm looking at the recommended motion, and under number 8, you already have that covered. So apparently you don't need my help in doing your jobs. All right. I can accept that, and I'm happy about it. But with the 3-year period for the conditional use and a review, an annual review, I think that should really, I think for people who have concerns, that should really set those more at ease. I don't think we're going to be dealing with a death metal band coming in. I've never heard any plans along those lines, but if so, then you're not powerless to react to such an obvious transgression of the CUP. So with that, thank you for what you're doing. Apparently, you guys know what you're doing. So I'm fully in favor. And with that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anybody else? Seeing no other speakers, I entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Ham and second by Commissioner Mader. All in favor? Close the
Aye.
public hearing.
Aye.
Opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Is there any questions on?
I would just like to say, this is not how I thought this was gonna turn out for the public hearing. Because I did go and drive by and look and see the homes, and I was very concerned. So thank you. I'm a teacher. I love analogies. So I love that. So thank you all for speaking out. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, just a couple of clarifying questions specific to the item number 2 within the recommended motion, and the southwest entrance into the patio area and route must meet ADA accessibility standards. I did my site visit today, and I don't have ADA standards completely memorized. You know, and to me, it looked tight, and I noticed only one handicapped parking stall. So, what were the specific ADA standards that we're looking to target?
So there's two separate items. The parking, number 1, is the businesses in the C1 district are not required to provide parking. So the parking that you're seeing near the venue, near the business, is public parking that's there, and the availability of the ADA spaces is based on that public parking
Okay.
kind of situation.
Thank
So
you.
that's not the responsibility of the business or anything else.
Okay, appreciate the clarity.
It is, as part of our public parking improvements, a requirement that we have
Overall.
at least one there in that location.
Okay.
Or near that location. In regard to the movement, the primary idea on this one is, one, if there were an emergency exit situation, to ensure that somebody who's there that may be in a wheelchair or may be handicapped in some manner physically, being challenged at least to get out, that they meet the minimum ADA requirements. That is reviewed by the building inspectors and the fire inspectors that will go through that. Generally, you're talking about I believe a width in that area. Usually it's an accessible path of 5 feet wide, so that's why a lot of our sidewalks are now 5 feet wide. It cannot have a certain percentage slope, exceed a certain slope, and I believe that's 2% slope, and maybe is the maximum on that. And then the width of those areas, I believe, is at least, it has to be at least 3 feet wide to get through an actual ingress-egress point at that point. So those things will all be reviewed by the inspectors as part of the permitting that'll go on in this process.
Okay.
I believe at this point, the southwest, if I remember right, the southwest exit out of the outdoor area there, I believe that has all been reviewed as part of their building permit when they did the patio and when they did the actual building to ensure that there was an accessible pathway into the building. So I believe that was taken care of at that point. But we'll double check that.
Okay, yeah, it looked tight from my perspective, and everything looked fresh. And so that's why I wasn't for sure if the work needed to be done, had been done, and what was the requirements. And I saw the one parking space, but to that point, that makes sense. It's all public parking, so that's all just
Yeah,
within
they-
that pool of public parking.
Right, and if they were required to have a parking area, an on-site parking area versus using street parking, if they were required to, then they would have to meet those ADA requirements for the number of spaces based on the size of that lot. So I don't have all the specifics, but I'm kind of like you, I'm aware of them, and then our inspectors are the ones that'll check on all of that.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, I had that question, and then I also just had a question regarding like the timing, because there within the staff report there was a proposal of a review of the permit on an annual basis, but yet we are approving this for a 3-year period. I have
Yep.
a hard time
So what
with
would
that.
Yeah. So
Tell
what
me
would
about it.
happen here is staff is recommending a 3-year period for the conditional use permit. So it would not necessarily have to come before you for 3 years from the date of issuance, but each year there will be an administrative review. So what happens is when this comes up on its first anniversary date, if approved, that first year we come up on that anniversary date, we will conduct an administrative review with the applicant. One of the things we'll do is we'll go to the police department, see if there have been any complaints filed against this establishment for operational purposes. Have we received any complaints in code enforcement for public nuisance activity or anything like that? So we'll go through that process. We'll basically be reviewing the elements, and we will also notify, again, the neighbors that are within the 200 feet, just like we did for the public hearing. They will receive a letter that this is under administrative review, and if they have issues, they're to bring them forward to staff. If on that review, getting that information, we're finding that there's repeated violations or there's something going on that the neighborhood is seeing a general concern with the operations, it could come before you at that point to reconsider or place new conditions on or anything like that. So the annual reviews are really administrative reviews behind the scenes that the applicant will go through with staff. If in that administrative review we find anything that is raising concerns, it's going to come forward to you for reconsideration and potentially either more conditions or even revocation of the conditional use permit. So at 3 years, though, they would be required to come back to you for a full renewal of the CUP. Okay?
Or if it changes hands,
Yeah, or changes.
ownership.
Yeah, and that's the other part. That's what item 9 is really about, because what we want to ensure, and I've seen this in other communities, conditional use permit may have been granted with conditions and a new owner comes along with the business, and it's never even disclosed to them that they have a conditional use permit. So they don't even know that they have operational conditions that they're supposed to follow. So the intent of number 9 is really to place the current owner of the business and the management group that's involved with this on notice that if they do sell in the future, this is not just an automatic extension of the CUP to those folks. We want them in, we want them to be renamed on the permit, and so they have a full understanding of the conditions that may be placed on them for that operation. So that's why that number 9 is really there. We've seen things happen, or I have, in other places, when you get management changes and stuff, and information doesn't get conveyed, and all of a sudden you do have a nuisance problem. And then we have to go through the process of basically calling them out.
Right. One more question for staff. So I don't want us to end up in the same position that we were in when we entertained the hibachi truck out on 175th and Waverly, I'm sorry, I went too far. I went too far west. I'm sorry. Right at the fork at
175th.
56 and 175th. So where they had already went and did all of these things, and then, we see from the planning commission perspective, well, there's extra things that need to be done for approval. And planning commission, we did a denial because they had not done, they were in progress of doing things. And then, council extended their application for 60 days to meet what was in the recommendation. So are all of these items, like, for example, I brought up the ADA, but number 1, the ingress, egress locations and circulation routes, is it currently in compliance with the International Building Code and the International Fire Code?
So-
have we hit that mark yet?
Yeah.
Or that's still outstanding?
So what will happen with that is once they place their tables out there and things like that, that's when the fire department and everybody inspects it for occupancy, for actual use of that venue for that activity. At that point, they will check for all of that. Now, what's nice in this particular venue is I believe all the tables in that are I'm gonna call them semi-movable. They're heavy, but they're not permanently attached to the ground. So this is similar to what the fire department does on an annual basis with commercial businesses. They will go out and do a walkthrough in the commercial businesses to make sure that aisle widths are adequate and things like that. So if the business or somebody starts moving tables around during a particular event, that may not get caught, but generally through walkthroughs and visits by the fire department and that, they basically place them back into conformance to make sure that the business is operating according to those rules and regulations. So you will have that in this situation, again, with mobile chair or the ability to move chairs and to move tables. I'm sure there will be times when, as crowds are doing different
As they all do.
things,
Right.
they'll do that.
Gather in group.
But again, it'll be up to the owner and operator at that point somehow to put that venue back together so that it's meeting those requirements. We're not gonna have the fire marshal coming in, I hope, at every event or a building inspector coming in at every event. But similar to like fireworks stands, we do spot inspections, we do things to try to watch and manage that. If we're hearing complaints, that's when we will, send somebody out there and say, look, we just can't have it happening this way, or maybe we can redo it. So the difference, I think, here, the real permanent part of this is really the stage element, that identification there. The rest of it is a relatively flexible scenario for us, yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully that helps you with those concerns.
That does. Just, it was kind of a pickle that we were placed in with that particular application, and I just don't want a similar type of pickle.
Correct. And I agree with you on that. Staff wants to avoid that as much as possible.
Cool. Yeah, I think I'm good for now with my questions.
Commissioner Gentleman.
Thank you, Dave, for the explanation on the 3-year annual one there. That was one of my questions as well. Related to that, I guess the restriction that we're putting of 3 events per month, I know that was in the letter from the operator as well. Is that something that is also up for that annual review, or is that something that has to be on the every 3 years?
So,
We're locking that in?
So staff mimicked what the applicant had placed into their application materials as their outline of how they wanted to operate. I will tell you that initially with this, staff has had concerns with noise, parking operations, things that may be floating through all your heads as you're thinking about this. We felt comfortable, given the scenario as we understood it from the applicant, that the 3 per month and the hours that they were indicating was reasonable to try. So if they wish to desire that, let's say they're wildly successful and they want to actually go to once a week or something like that, they would have to come back and have their conditional use permit amended by you all. Okay, so they could do that proactively based on how they want to do it. Or in the annual review, as we're looking at it, they might say, oh, I would like to change this, or I would like to do this. That could trigger the amendment process to the CUP. They would have to come back to you in the city council for that amendment.
It's not an administrative.
No, at that point, we would be locked into this just as the applicant would be. And so these are the standards we would be holding them to as part of the administrative review. We found that they were holding 4 events, 6 events, 10 events, things like that a month. That could be concern for us to come back to you all and say, you need to determine if we should amend it or hold them to the 3 or even revoke the process, because now this has gotten out of control. So that's in your court and the governing body's court, not in our court.
Yeah, I don't know if there's somewhere in the code that defines what an event is. Is it where someone gets on stage and is playing? Is it a raucous Chiefs game that goes past 10 p.m. at night? I don't know if I don't want to, get too in the weeds, but I don't know where the flexibility is.
Yeah, the TV element and watching games and that is not what I would consider an event. The use of the stage is what is really critical here. The use of the stage or any other elements that support the stage, that's the venue or the activity that we would be looking at here. I believe that's what the applicant intended.
It's the same sound system.
Commissioner Cooper? Anybody else?
No, thank you, staff, for laying all that out. I think between Commissioner Mayer and staff explanation, I think all the bases have been covered with our responsibility.
I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make that motion. After review of application 23-305-06, a conditional use permit for the Bellows at Ashland-Anvil, located at 204 East Park Street, dated 9/1/23, staff recommends the planning commission recommend approval for the issuance of such permit with the following conditions. Items number 1 through 9 as outlined in the staff report.
Second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Meter and a second by Commissioner Ham. Any further discussion on the motion? Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you for the abbreviated motion.
That was excellent.
You're most
You saw I did not make it because I knew you could.
No. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If you are, and not just as a reminder, and Commissioner Mader recognized this, if we have those kinds of recommendations with those long conditions in that, it's perfectly okay to cite it in that numeric fashion as you did, unless you're making adjustments to the actual conditions.
It's preferred that you guys do that, because the outset and then many words.
You're gonna mess it
You mess it up.
And then have to restart it, sometimes do it, and then just, or that we just don't have to listen to you guys talk.
Exactly. It's all over
Yeah,
now.
we get up and talk for a while.
Oh, yeah, you're up next, huh?
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
One item for discussion.
Oh,
Do we have?
Yeah, we're.
Thanks for coming. I appreciate it.
Councilman, forgive me. I don't know if it's appropriate, but I would challenge you all to come by tonight. Spend 15 minutes and see for yourself. The truth is the truth is the truth. And you can best understand what you just voted for, because it's pretty awesome.
I'll make a trip out there.
Drinks on Dave.
Even better.
yep.
For We're buying drinks for the.
Yeah, we're on water. Lots of water. Drink lots.
Thank you all for doing what you do. Hold it there.
There we go, better, better. Good to see you.
I'm very happy to see you always.
Yeah, no, you never know.
Yes. Now, there'll probably be a summary kind of thing, but if you want, I think we can provide the slides and everything, so if you want to, we can send that out. When I send the links to those plans, like the Main Street plan and the downtown plan, I can attach, the PDF of the PowerPoint presentations, stuff like that. But this will also be recorded, this is all part of the recording for the meeting too, so it'll be on there. Okay. All right.
Cool. Well, this kind of follows our discussion last meeting, so I'm going to run through just some basic training. We're going to start and talk about what the Planning Commission does. I'm going to touch super briefly on what boards of zoning appeals do, even though I don't think I've ever seen you guys sit as a BZA. So I will race through that part for you.
So let me, when you get to it, if you just take a pause for a second, I'll comment on BZA stuff. So
Cool. And then we're going to touch on the Kansas Open Meetings Act and Open Records Act, which are CORA and COMA. At any point, you guys are welcome to jump in with questions. We can kind of talk at the end. I'm going to try to hit some higher level stuff, and then as you guys have like specific issues, things you want to revisit from last meeting, new things, feel free to jump in. It's not going to hurt my feelings. So.
you're good. Just
No, yeah, we don't need to open
We don't
that.
need it.
Okay, so just briefly, as a reminder, so we are here as a part of our city planning. So just the general things to keep in mind as you're thinking about cities, and especially, Gardner is unique from some of those more almost landlocked municipalities in the other parts of the county that don't have as much space to grow. So the long-range planning for somewhere like Gardner is pretty important. So how, always consider how what you're doing today, what you're doing next month is going to affect, decades down the line. We're seeing more annexations, more land being developed and more of that infill development that you're not going to see as much in, I live in Roland Park. Roland Park isn't annexing and they're not doing a lot of new infill development because everything's kind of built up there already. So comprehensive is a word we're going to hear a lot today. You have a comprehensive plan that kind of guides you that we're going to touch on. So viewing the city as a whole, and one of the things that we run into a lot is you have a specific development coming up for it's usually with more dense housing, and you're going to hear the neighbors around them. And spoiler alert, they're almost always opposed to it. I don't think I've ever seen an apartment building come in and people say, "Heck yeah, let's do it." That's just part of cities. So. It's always good to remember that you're planning as a part of the city as a whole. So, if everyone had their way, we would all live in a city but have all the lots right around us empty. That's what my preference would be, so that I wouldn't have to walk my dogs quite so much. But unfortunately, we're planning for a city, so keep that in mind. Your city building, good civics design, your efficient municipal and public services, the strong fiscal strategies, probably hits more towards your governing body since they're actually doing a budget, but it's always something for you guys to be aware of. So roles of the Planning Commission, these are created, your body is created by state statute, so it's not just something that Gardner woke up one day and decided to do. Every city in Kansas has to have one. So the duties, again, set by state law. So every planning commissioner in the state is doing these same things. You're making a comprehensive plan, you're approving location, extent, and character of your public improvements. You're reviewing and recommending that capital improvement plan every year, so you're checking and making that recommendation to the city council as far as what improvements the city is going to be doing over the next year and 5 years, and kind of prioritizing and ranking those. You're approving plats, you're reviewing and recommending zoning changes, any other decisions that your local zoning ordinance refers to you, and then an annual review of your plans. So you all are appointed by, there's my first typo of the night, the governing body would be what that should be said. But so again, because you're not directly elected, there's kind of that level between you and the citizens, and that's by design. So you guys can keep that long-term, long citywide goal in mind. You're inevitably going to make people unhappy with some decision. There's never a decision that comes to you guys, except maybe tonight, where everybody is on board and wants it to be the exact same. So, that's part of that appointing process of You're here because of your backgrounds, your expertise in the area of, engineering, city planning, land use, that type of thing. So you get to elect a chair and a vice chair. You elect a secretary, and importantly, your secretary doesn't have to be an active member. So our secretaries over here, it's almost always a staff member, so that you guys aren't having to type up the minutes every month. Do you want to jump in on BZA stuff too much?
A couple things here. So in BZA, I'm going to point to a couple things. You do sit as the BZA as well. This has been something that has happened in a lot of Kansas communities. Your Board of Zoning Appeals or Board of Zoning Adjustment, as it's referred to in some places, that board is created primarily to look at variances to the code, so granting of variances or requests for variances from the code, because they infrequently meet, and I mean very infrequently meet. It was difficult to have volunteers on a separate body as a BZA, so a number of communities have gone to the option that the Planning Commission considers the BZA as well. So when we get specific variance applications and requests, you would actually adjourn as a Planning Commission, or we would do the BZA first, and you would adjourn as the BZA to then take on Planning Commission items, or you would do your Planning Commission items, then adjourn and then reconvene as a BZA to hear the variances. So that would be something that would be highly unusual here. I will tell you, and I can see already that Spencer's going to go here, it is to be a very high bar to get and have a variance granted. Okay, and I think you're going to touch on that, so I'm going to stop with that and let you talk to that. And then at the end of this, when Spencer gets through this, I want to talk just briefly about the difference between a variance and a deviation. So
Yeah, thanks. That's a good one.
We'll go there.
Yeah, just generally, I'm not going to go through this in depth. I think I've been doing this a few years now. I don't think I've come out here where you all are sitting as a BZA, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time other than to say variances are inherently difficult to obtain. And that's part of why people don't come ask you for them all the time. If they were easy to get, you guys would be getting them every single meeting of someone saying, oh, I'd sure like my house to be able to break this one little law, but it's not happening. So part of that is, the state is sort of self-corrected and less. 5 years ago, I was sitting on some other cities that were getting variances every month, and the BZA was convening every month. Not happening anymore. So, that's kind of the takeaway. In communities like this, it's especially not as apt. One of the big things is there has to be something unique about the lot for the variance, and for the most part, Gardner has more straightforward lots. There aren't a lot of creeks running through everyone's backyards or triangular lots that are some relic of old zoning. So you won't be dealing with this too much. But as Dave said, and why don't you go ahead and hit now, there are still going to be deviations that staff's going to be recommending to you, which are a bit different.
So I will also tell you that staff discourages people from making application for variances, because the 5 points that you see on Spencer's slide here, you have to meet all of those requirements. It's not, oh, I've met one so I can get to go. You have to meet all 5. And that's specified by state law as well as our local ordinance. So it's not just a matter of, we can kind of overlook what it says here and it's close enough and good enough. Think of a variance as something that alleviates you from the legal requirement that is in the code. That's what essentially the variance is doing on a case-by-case basis. And that's why that bar, that standard was set so high, is because the belief is when you write your codes, you're going into great detail to say, these are the standards we want met, okay? So it's one of those items that the variance is intentionally made very difficult to get, okay? Where I want to be clear is, and you will see this, when we come to you with development plans, preliminary development plans, final development plans that are part of rezoning processes, the Planning Commission, not the BZA at this point, because we're technically not talking about a variance. We're talking about a deviation from code that is put into a plan, and the deviation is requested, but it is the belief that that deviation and the solution that's presented as part of that plan is creating a better than, an equal to or better than scenario. So what it allows is, when we do basically development planning for a project that might have a number of buildings or a mixed set of uses, it allows us to sit there in that individual case, you as a planning commission, review that development plan and sit there and say, you know what, we're getting a higher quality development. We may have given a deviation over here, but in exchange in this context context, we got this, 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 and this. So this makes it a better scenario for us. We're willing to give on something, but in exchange, what are we getting back from that? So that's where the deviation requests come in that you will see periodically in the staff reports when you say the applicant has requested these 4 deviations. Okay, so just be aware of that. I try to correct it whenever I catch it when somebody says, "Oh, we're doing a no, there's a difference between variance and a planned deviation." You will see planned deviations more frequently because of the planned zoning districts that we utilize.
So just briefly, I'm going to kind of break down, again, you can largely ignore that BZA column, but it's in there. So the differences between your governing body and your planning commission, right, elected versus appointed, we kind of already hit that. Another big thing is if we all think back to our initial civics class where we talk about the 3 branches of government, of executive and legislative and judicial. So your governing body is your legislative body for a city. The planning commission fits more into a quasi-judicial role. I mean, the Board of Zoning Appeals is a quasi-judicial role. It's almost a court. You're making a hearing. Your public hearing tonight was what they call a quasi-judicial function. You're collecting evidence and you're making a ruling based on that evidence. That is essentially what a judge does. So the other kind of roles and responsibilities is we talk about the governing body looks immediate and long-term both. The planning commission is intended to have that long-term goal. Ideally, everyone who's coming before us is proposing something to be built that's going to last for decades, hopefully. So we want to keep in mind of how that's going to look 20 years from now and the areas around it, what it's going to look like. So if you think of it, that second to last bullet point down there, the governing body executes a plan that you guys made. So zoning text amendments start with you guys. You guys are creating that plan, and then the governing body's looking at it and executing it. Rezonings, you're making that plan, and the governing body it's up to them to kind of enact that.
I'm going to add something, Spencer, just very quickly. Understand the public hearings you are holding are the official public hearings. Okay, so state statute requires on a rezoning and several other actions that you take that a public hearing is being held that is properly notified. You are the official public hearing body. The city council many times will open it up to hear the public speak at their session, but you have met the state requirements when we hold the official public hearing. So the governing body could say, yeah, we're not going to hear anything more from the public. We've got a record of the minutes, we've heard at the planning commission, so on and so forth, and they can move forward with the process. So be aware of that this is the official public hearing body for many of these activities, even though many times you'll tune into a city council meeting and you'll see the mayor go, is there anybody out there who wants to speak on this? Well, that's usually sufficing for them. They want to make sure that everybody's been heard and they're double checking that. The one thing I do want to say about quasi-judicial, just to make sure that we have a good understanding, the Board of Zoning Appeals, when you're acting in that capacity, that quasi-judicial becomes very, very important because actually to appeal a decision by the BZA, it would go to district court. It doesn't go to the governing body. The appeal goes to district court. That's why you're kind of in that judicial process. The BZA variance heads off, okay? Whereas with the Planning Commission, when you're making recommendations with the deviations in that element, an appeal or a protest, if you will, follows the protest procedure, but it still goes to the governing body. So there are some things that you all make final decisions on that could be protested, and that appeal would go to the governing body versus district court. So I just wanted to clarify that for you. That's a little bit of background so that you understand the rules.
So again, so the types of decisions that you guys are making are pretty varied, and they hit all of that, everything from quasi-judicial to some legislative to some administrative. So when you guys are looking through your text amendments, every once in a while, staff brings you changes to the zoning code. That's essentially you're making a recommendation for a legislative decision by the governing body. Your rezonings, your special use permits and conditional use permits, your site plans, your exceptions. I guess we don't do exceptions here as much. Those would be those types of quasi-judicial roles. Comprehensive plan is really your biggest legislative function. So that's your chance to write it and participate in writing a document that kind of dictates what we're doing going forward. Making that plan, that usually making the plan isn't as much up to you guys. And then plats are an administrative role. They're kind of the lowest level things that you all get to do. There's not a lot of discussion. There's not a public hearing. It's really a checkbox. That's the least, there's no fact finding you guys are doing. You're just saying binary yes or no, this is there.
I'm gonna add that. So plats are only required to meet the legal requirements for land subdivision. The technical requirements are all in the regulations and things like that. So when staff reviews those, and what Spencer's referring to as administrative process, you will note in our codes, a lot of times it will state, if all the parameters are met, it's basically an automatic approval. It has nothing to do with the use of the land. It has nothing to do with anything like that. It's all about, did they meet the legal parameters for subdividing the property, and are they providing the appropriate functioning elements to support that subdivision? If they've checked all those boxes, that's why many times our staff reports when it comes to plats are basically saying, yeah, they met our technical review, it meets all of this, so on and so forth. So you may have plats before you. I don't know if you've encountered this, I have. I've had situations where I've had a rezoning or a development plan request and a plat as two separate actions, and there's been a refusal of the actual development plan, if you will, denial, recommendation of denial, but a recommendation of approval for the plat. Now, sometimes what will happen is if there's a recommendation for denial, the applicant will withdraw the plat at that point, pull away from the project. But I have seen that happen because technically, even though you've recommended denial here, they've met all the technical parameters because it's an administrative function. Your choice to deny cannot be based on the fact that you denied the plan. It has to be based in the technical parameters of the plat being met. But obviously, if the plan's not getting approved, the plat's not going to get approved. You know, so just so you're, well, it could get approved, it's just not going to get executed.
Right. So I don't know that I've ever seen staff recommend denial of a plat, because if the plat should be denied, staff is going to stop that before it gets to you. You are going to see staff recommend denial of some of these other things like rezonings and use permits.
As Spencer said that just triggers for me. Our goal is to bring before you things that are worthy of approval, just so you know. So a lot of times when you see us, you're wondering, why is staff recommending approval here? It's because we've reached a point where we feel comfortable to recommend approval to you. That doesn't mean you have to accept that recommendation. It just means we're trying to get as much, I guess is the way to put it, as much as we can out of that application process. But at the end of the day, we cannot deny an applicant due process. Okay? Due process means they can move forward with whatever they want to bring before you in whatever state that they deem necessary, as long as they meet our minimum application submittal requirements. Okay?
Yeah. Due process is what gives people their day in court. It's why you get to go challenge the speeding ticket that you definitely
So
deserve.
I can't stop a person from coming forward to you with a request that at the end of the day I'm recommending denial on, or you're looking at and going, why are you spending time doing this? Well, I cannot deny them due process if the application was submitted, meets the requirements for an effective or complete application, and they want to move forward with that, test your will to accept it. I can't stop that.
Yeah, and one thing that, I mean, with that, staff, we're all adults, so if you disagree with the staff recommendation, that is not going to hurt staff's feelings. They're not going to hold that against you unless you call them names during the hearing. So, yeah, and maybe not even that. It might affect me a little bit, but I have self-esteem issues. So, but you are welcome to deny things that are recommended for approval. You're welcome to do the opposite. Tonight we had 9 conditions. Commissioner Juneman was talking about 3 events per month. You guys can stop and say, hey, how do you feel about 4 or 2 or on unlimited? And you can change one of the 9 conditions. That's totally up to you all. So staff brings you a recommendation, like Dave said, that they're comfortable with. And oftentimes what you guys are seeing is a negotiated end result. So if you see a plan and you're like, man, this isn't that great, probably was a whole lot worse when it was first brought to staff, and they've done a lot of work behind the scenes to get it to that position where they're comfortable with you looking at it. And they don't want you to look at a plan that is half-baked and hasn't gone through some of those issues with the last conditional use permit that we saw. So just keep in mind, you are welcome to change and fiddle with those, add, delete. You know, a lot of people, when they first come on planning commissions, I hear the complaint of like, I feel like I have to vote yes on everything. You absolutely do not. You don't have to vote yes if you feel like everyone else is. You know, vote your conscience, vote the way that you feel the code should be applied. Be vocal about that. Staff is not trying to tell you how to run the city. City council has another layer on top of you all, so just be aware, you know, it's okay to have an individual voice up here.
And I will tell you, my job when this goes to the governing body, if we have those situations, is to, you know, state both positions. So when I'm up there with the city council at the meeting, I will refer to the staff recommendation and I will refer to the planning commission recommendation. The planning commission recommendation actually potentially carries more weight, because if you're denying something or have recommended something and the city council wants to go against your recommendation, not staff's recommendation, but your recommendation, there is that supermajority test that they have to meet when they do that. So, you know, your recommendation carries more weight in that sense, legal sense of how they're looking at things, than the staff recommendation does at that point in time, because it has ramifications for what they may have to do as a voting procedure to either, to do a decision that goes against your recommendation. They don't have to do that with staff's recommendation.
So again, just discussing those types of decisions you guys make. Your legislative decision is making a policy. So your legislative role, the biggest one, is your comprehensive plan. That is a policy document. It guides the city over the next decade. It is identifying where you want specific types of uses. That's a legislative role. Your quasi-judicial roles are weighing what's in front of you, the evidence you hear from the staff report, from your public hearing, against the policy that has been created. So part of that is the policy you all created with your comp plan, and part of that is the policy that the city council has enacted through ordinances, and part of it sometimes is policy that your state lawmakers have made. And administrative, there's, like I said, there's really no policy involved. You're just checking boxes. Kind of hit all that. So I'm going to hit the comprehensive plan. This is probably the biggest thing over the course of a planning commission. A lot of times people can come on and off a commission without touching the comp plan because it's redone every 10 years. So some of you may be lucky enough to not have to make one, but this is a super important thing and is required by state law. So it tells the city how it's going to grow and develop in the future. So it talks about the location and relationship of land uses. You'll see a development map in staff reports that always goes back to the same comp plan about, is this what we wanted in this spot originally? Did we want industrial or high density residential here, or was this supposed to be R1 from the start? We're going to go back to that. Your population and building intensity standards. So again, comparing high versus low density residential, high versus low intensity commercial use. Priority of public improvements, your plan for capital improvements, roads, bridges, that type of stuff. And then anything else that you guys want to put in there is important as a guiding document for your city. So one thing that I hear a lot is, this is your policy guiding document. It is not binding. So a lot of times, like I said, people are going to come in, they're going to read the comp plan and say, I don't like this apartment complex that's being proposed because the comp plan says this is R1 and this is a RP4. So you're violating the comp plan. You can't put it there. I don't know if anyone, I'm going to go back to Pirates of the Caribbean when we talk about the Pirates Code, if it's more of a guideline. This is more, you can violate the comp plan and go against that type of use as long as it meets the other categories for, as we talk about, a rezoning. So you're not bound by the comp plan. It is set in stone, but you don't have to follow it like it's set in stone. It's a guiding document for you to be aware of. But again, don't let people, use the comp plan against you where they want to. It's just there to kind of tell you guys where we're going.
So before you go to I'm glad you flipped the slide. So the thing that I want to point out here, and Spencer is absolutely correct about this, it is a guiding document. It is adopted by the city. It is a guiding document. And in Kansas in particular, with our zoning codes and our LDC land development codes and unified development codes, all the different ones that are out there, they generally refer to your review criteria, and the comprehensive plan is one of those review criteria that was suggested by, well, not suggested, that was outlined by the state Supreme Court as a guiding element for your decision making. So when you look at something, comprehensive plan is a real easy card that if you want to deny something or approve something, if it's in compliance with the comprehensive plan, you can use that as a reason for your basically recommending approval. It's in line with our comprehensive plan. That's one of the cards that you have in your hand. based on those criteria. On the same hand, it is also a card that is in your hand to recommend denial. And it's a justified recommendation of denial at that point because you're using the comprehensive plan. The comp plan says this. I still believe that that's in effect here. We want to do that with the comp plan. So I always tell people is you look at this, we try to give you the review criteria in the staff report that are utilized by law, okay? Those items give you reason to sit there and justify your recommendation or your thought process on recommending denial or approval in that case. And it's a safe place for you to be because it's recognized by the Kansas Supreme Court as those guiding criteria. So I don't know if you were going to quite go there, but
It's in a few slides.
may have jumped a little bit ahead on that.
Okay, so Gardner's comprehensive plan was enacted in 2014, which means, spoiler alert, it's going to be coming up in the next couple of years for you all. So there's a couple snapshots in some of these next few slides that I pulled out of your comprehensive plan. It's something for you to be aware of, know where it is, know how to find it when you're reviewing applications. No one expects you guys to know this thing forwards and backwards. It is over 100 pages.
It's long.
There's a lot in there. Frankly, it would probably be, your families would kill you if you were wasting your time reading it to the point where you have to know it. But it's there as a reference guide for you guys when you're getting these questions of, do I approve this application? So the biggest thing is this goals and objectives. Here's this goal and objectives map that was put together in 2014 for the next 15 to 20 years. And it talks about, as it kind of, your table of contents as you go through the plan of what it was looking for. So this was referring to your future land use map is what you guys are going to see a lot in every staff report. It is telling you in the comp plan where in 2014 the plan for the city to grow and expand. You will have a new one made for your next comp plan. Again, you do not have to follow this to a T. As you zoom in and go street by street, this is not binding on you all, but it's that plan looking forward of what the intent was for the city, that long-range goal. Zoning text amendments, that's your other legislative decision. We've done these recently. You kind of get them intermittently from staff. As you guys, the one note I really want to make is as you guys are going through decisions and you notice there's something in the code that seems off or seems like it's behind the times or could be changed, bring it up. You can make zoning text amendments as much or as little as you all want. You can propose them. You can ask staff to put it on the agenda and we can go through it and help you draft up language. Staff is great at drafting language. I'm here to help you guys draft language. You have access to all of us. So feel free to use us. Feel free to ask questions if you think there should be a change. You are not bound by us bringing you proposed changes. You're not bound by the language we proposed. We just happen to do this as our job, so we have the time to go through it a little more in detail. But as you guys are going and you see those issues, don't be afraid to point them out. We touched a bit on due process. I'm just going to hit the big two things here are prejudging applications. Absolutely, you guys know, don't do that. Keep an open mind. Don't tell people that you've made a decision in advance. That's like the biggest no-no you guys can do because it shows that you guys walked in here and didn't give the applicant their due process. The other thing about due process is ex parte contact. So again, this is a community. This is not so big that you guys are never going to see people before you and never going to hear talk about it. So it's okay to be a part of those conversations and be there. You don't need to yell at people to stop talking, but you do need to be aware of and disclose. And if an applicant is coming up to you and talking to you about their application, you're welcome to run that by Dave or I, and we can tell you, hey, sounds like they crossed the line. Why don't you disclose that in the meeting and we'll talk about it. Maybe you need to abstain. Or we can say, hey, sounds like that was your neighbor talking to you. Not a big deal. But again, I would rather you guys ask me that question rather than just make an assumption. After this meeting, I will give each of you my cell phone if you want it. I'm not going to put it in a public document. Not that I think the citizens have that little to do, but I'm just not going to do it. You are welcome to call my cell phone. It is a work phone. I'm on it way too much according to my loved ones. You're welcome to call me, ask questions whenever you want. That's what we're here for.
I'm just going to make one comment on prejudging an application, and that comment is because I do encourage you to go and look at these sites when you have opportunity to do so. So in the cases before you to go and look at it, probably one of the most difficult things that happens is an individual might approach you and go, well, what are you thinking about this? Don't offer your opinion to them at that point in time because they're evaluating it. And I think you can honestly say, well, I'm trying to get a handle on this based on the staff report that I've got in my hands, and I'm trying to look at the site from this perspective, but I haven't come to a conclusion on it at this point. And they may talk to you a little bit about what they think. That's that's fine. That may get into the realm of ex parte communication at that point, and you need to disclose that so that all commissioners are at least privy to the fact that that conversation took place. And if there was some information that you felt was worth sharing with them, they all have that information. I talked to one individual when I was out there making a site visit, and they had concerns about this, this, and this. Okay, it's on the public record, we're good, everybody's been exposed to that. You've done your job. So the prejudging, that's a real stickler, because if you give that indication prior to the public hearing in particular, okay, the idea is the public hearing is there for you to hear that openly in front of everybody and be able to arrive conclusions from that position at that point in time. But if you've already prejudged, you're closed to whatever's being said in the public hearing, and guess what an attorney will do? If somebody's feeling disgruntled by what you did, they said, I talked to that planning commission, 3 days before the public hearing, they already told me how they were gonna vote. They said they were leaning this way. They closed their mind to this. Do not do that, please.
And it's okay to tell people, hey, great thoughts. Our meetings are the fourth Monday of every month. I'd love to have you there. Come talk. Or if they're busy, we all have busy things going on, they can send an email to staff. Staff will include that in the packet. It'll be part of the record that goes on to the governing body. So, it's tough. No one wants to be rude, but you guys, it's okay if you be like, hey, I really got to keep a clear mind on this. Come tell everybody. We'd love to hear from you. And it's truly, these decisions are better. I know it gets grating when you have 30 people here lined up to tell you, but that's better than no one being here to tell you and then getting mad afterwards. So, all right, rezoning. Dave was kind of touched on this earlier, so no, that's okay. Segues are good. Rezonings are tough, and this is where we're going to get the most opposition. No one likes change. There's a common phrase called NIMBY. It stands for not in my backyard. No one likes the change near them. That's just the way of life. We all like our neighborhoods the way they are. So the Supreme Court in the 70s of Kansas set out what they call the golden factors for what a city should look at when they're considering a rezoning request. One thing that's important here is this isn't the set of check boxes that you have to look at. You guys don't need to look at every single one of these and say yes, no, yes, no. This is their guideline of what they wanted you to look at. But these are the things that are in every staff report. We're going to touch, there's a few more that our city code has added, but character of the neighborhood, the zoning of nearby properties, the suitability of this property for what it's proposed to. The length of time it's been vacant is a big one, and growing communities like Gardner where there are a lot of empty infill areas. Relative gain to the public health and safety. Your recommendations of staff is something that the Supreme Court has told you guys to think about. So again, I told you can ignore us, but you do have to listen to us. And then conformance with your master plan, which is that comp plan. So again, that is a factor that is recommended you all talk about and think about is, does this conform with the comp plan? But don't get tricked into thinking as long as it's okay in the comp plan, we have to vote yes. That's just one of the things that we want you guys to look at.
And I would say the other part of that is when you look at this, it's not like, 5 are in favor and 3 are against, or 2 are in favor and 5 are against. That's not what this is. Any one of these at any one particular time can be utilized to justify your recommendation and outweigh any of the other considerations. The idea of the courts was really to look at these are a rational nexus to start with. This is where we can start looking and saying, these are the kind of questions you should be looking at. These are the kinds of considerations you should have, and not just making arbitrary and capricious decisions or recommendations. So that's the start point. That's why it's there, but it is not intended. I look at it as a deck of cards and sit there and go, well, this card says that sometimes. Well, I'm going to pull that card and go, yeah, the comp plan outweighs it in this particular instance, or even a Main Street plan or a downtown plan. So just be aware of that.
One thing to point out, you can find these in our city code. So your city code tells you what to look at and then adds some in addition to those golden factors. That's 1703030. But there's 4 more. Character of the neighborhood, including, so they added a bit more, the design of streets, civic spaces, open spaces, scale and pattern and design of buildings. So again, you hear us talk about massing and where the buildings are in the pattern. So those are things that our code calls out for us to highlight for you. The zoning of other properties nearby, compatibility of potential uses, the proposed district with other districts. So again, just a little beefier than the golden factor there. And then adverse effect on utilities, infrastructure, public services. So a lot of people harp on that one and hinge in on it and talk to you about traffic. Again, in every proposed rezoning from low to high use, especially residential, I guarantee you at least 2 people are going to come up and say, this traffic is unacceptable. I don't like the traffic plan. There's no way our streets can protect this. People already drive too fast. So again, that's a factor to consider, the effect on infrastructure. I will tell you, you're going to hear that every time. So be aware, read the traffic study, drive the area, take a peek at it, and then know that just because it's going to increase traffic doesn't mean that's in and of itself grounds to vote no. But it can be a reason to vote no. So just be cognizant of that. Okay, we're going to jump the variances because you guys aren't doing that much. Administrative decisions.
I mentioned one other thing.
Yeah.
I think this. Well, no, go ahead. We'll do it at the end.
Okay. We've kind of talked about administrative stuff more than probably you even need to be trained on it. Stay objective, keep it simple, and listen to staff on that. So one thing is the order of applications. We had a public hearing tonight, so great example. So staff report, comments by the applicant, your public hearing is opened, closed, and discussion, and then a vote. So one thing is be aware of when you all are talking. So just like tonight, you can ask questions of the applicant before the public hearing. You can ask after the public hearing. During the public hearing, let the public speak and don't get engaged with them. This is not a call and response. You're going to hear things that you absolutely disagree with or that you know are demonstrably false and they're ridiculous. Just write a note and tell yourself to hit it when the public hearing is closed. The worst thing you can do is if I get up here and start telling you that this is going to do something terrible and here's why, and you know I'm wrong, is to call me out in the middle of it, because no one appreciates that, and that's not going to get your point across, and it's just going to turn into a shouting match. So let the public, they are there to get their voice heard. That's part of the due process. Let them do that, and then discuss and listen carefully. Even if they're saying something that you think is really stupid, just take a second to listen to it and think about where it's coming from, because it's coming from somewhere. If they felt the need to drive down here on a Monday night, it's football season, it's Monday Night Football, they gave up something to be here to tell you guys their feelings. So give them that opportunity in your fair thoughts. So motions, my big thing that I always train on, and you guys already nailed it tonight, is you do not need to read all the conditions. We heard that tonight. Don't be afraid to incorporate what's written on your screen, just like Commissioner Mader did tonight. Don't be afraid to change conditions. Don't be afraid to make your own motions. Don't be afraid to say, hey, this is the motion I think I want to make. Does this make sense? And throw it over to staff, and we can tell you good, bad. Hey, here's how you workshop that. You might need to give us a second to write it down. I like to look at things written out before I say yes or no, but we're here as a resource for you all, especially in the motions. If you want to change a motion, you can move to amend. So after a motion's made and before there's a vote, you have a chance. Any discussion on that motion, you can move to amend and add on other conditions. We're happy to guide you through that process because sometimes it gets messy, but we will get you there. So just don't be afraid to ask questions. All right, Open Meetings Act. Again, another Kansas state law. Every state has some level of this, and the goal is to make sure that our governments are open and available for citizens so that they don't feel like they're being run by some shadow cabal of you guys deciding what to build and where. They have no role. So anytime a covered entity has a meeting, your Open Meetings Act applies. Planning Commission, you are a covered entity under statute. So we're going to talk about more what those phrases mean because it gets a little tricky. So the Open Meetings Act is going to apply a gathering or assembly in person or through so Zoom is a big one that's changed with COVID, by a majority of the membership of the public body, subject to the act. So there's 7 of you, so anytime 4 of you are together and talking about the affairs of the body or agency. So all of you guys can get together, go out and have a drink and talk about whatever you want. Totally fine, doesn't break any rules. Once somebody brings up, hey, what do you guys think about that application next week? Or, hey, what did you think about that vote? Now we have a problem because now you're discussing the affairs of the body or agency. So just be aware of that. Again, you're going to run into each other at the store, at events. That's totally okay. I will say if there are big city events where you think you're all going to go, you're going to have staff reaching out to you as a potential quorum notice. So we'll publish those and say, hey, we think most of the city council is going to be at the air show. And we publish that so people are aware of it. That's just a Tacoma thing to kind of show your city that we're thinking about it. One thing, well, I guess I'll just move on because it's up here. So interactive communications. So during your regular meetings, COMA applies right now. any special meetings, any work sessions. If all of you are on a conference call, COMA would apply. If all of you are on a video call, it would apply. If all of you run into each other at the store at the same time, it's weird, but it applies. The big thing that's tricky and that gets most bodies into trouble is online communications and what they call serial communications. So it doesn't get around COMA for Commissioner Combs to call each of you one at a time and say, you should vote yes, you should vote yes, you should vote yes. That's called a serial communication. And they're going to count that as an open meeting. And that just violated COMA because you just had an open meeting in your living room on the phone with everybody, and we didn't publish a notice of it. So be aware. That applies to things like Facebook comments or email threads. So there was a county that got in trouble a few years ago. It was a 3-member board of county commissioners. They had a meeting. It got contentious over like a hospital edition. They got on a Facebook page after the meeting, and 2 of the county commissioners, so that's a majority of the body, were arguing back and forth over the comment section on Facebook. First of all, please do not go argue with each other or the citizens on Facebook. No one ever wins in that situation. But there, because that was a majority of the body, they were talking about the purpose of the body, and they didn't publish any meetings because it was just a Facebook comment thread. There was a COMA violation. The Attorney General got involved. So just be aware. I'm sure you're all in a lot of the same Facebook groups for the community. That's okay. You can be in the group, but just another caution to stay out of those comments and let your voice be heard in these meetings.
So this is a great point where I was going to make my point earlier. Speaking or indicating even after a vote, even after a meeting, anything like that, I'm going to tell you to refrain from doing that on any public platform in any conversation. And the reason I'm going to tell you that is there generally is a party that's happy with your decision and there's a party that's not happy with your decision. And the party who is not happy will many times look for ways to challenge the decision or to challenge the direction that things are going. And I've always, as a planner, one of the things that I try to be very conscientious of is if I have a group or an individual who does feel particularly like they're going to challenge that decision, all I have to do is search around and get the right attorney to represent me who says, you know what? That planning commissioner said they did this because of that. And this planning commissioner said they did this because of that. And this planning commissioner said, I don't understand why we did this. And all of a sudden, everybody's going to start questioning, did the planning commission even know what it was doing? And they will challenge it based on you've had individual conversations. They're going to look for splits in the group and things. You may disagree with the recommendation. You may feel that way, but you need to be very careful about how you state things, what you say, even after a vote, because there are people out there that are looking at this from the standpoint of, this went against me. I wonder why they did this. So let me find out why they did this, and if you make it publicly known, that could be something that indicates a split in the commission that's inconsistent. And so we got to be very careful about what we say even after these meetings are held.
Yeah, you don't need to go out and explain why you voted to the public. You can explain your vote during the meeting and say, here's why I'm voting yes or no, and that's it. You don't have to go defend your decision later, even if people are griping at you. So just be aware of that. Again, so the other part of COMA is it applies when you're talking about the business of the body. So it doesn't require a vote for it to be the business of the body. You all don't need to get together and at the end vote yes or no on something. As long as you're talking about city planning, the comprehensive plan, a development that's coming before you, you're talking about the business of the body. So just be aware when a lot of you are getting together. I know sometimes this is your common thread, so the easy thing in a conversation is to fall back on what you all share in common. I would recommend finding something else that you share in common. Living here is fine. Talk about Gardner, just don't talk about the developments. And then that last thing is avoid that appearance of impropriety. So again, if you all run into each other at the air show, that's totally okay, but be aware that someone who might be unhappy with something you did that year might look at it and take a picture and start throwing a fit. And then it just looks kind of sketchy. And it doesn't matter what you were talking about, it just looks fishy. So again, you are not barred from hanging out, being together. Just be aware of how it appears when you guys are all in the same place, when there's 2 or 3 of you in the same place. I hit on serial meetings earlier. That's the tricky thing. So just be aware. You guys can call and text each other. Just don't do that with the majority of the body. So what is it requires? Why are we talking? When does it, when if it's a meeting, what's the outcome. So you have to make a meeting open to the public. So that's why if all of you are together at the store or in someone's living room, that's not necessarily open to the public. So our open meetings are here for everyone to come in. You can't take any binding action by secret ballot. That's why we do our voice votes out loud. That is why the city council, you see them go in executive session, but they're not taking a vote back there to make a binding action. They're just getting some level of private conversation before coming out. You cannot completely prohibit recording devices. You have to give them date, time, and place of meeting. Again, staff will post that. And you don't have to post an agenda, but if there's an agenda, it has to be available to people. So again, that's why our agenda is going out for everyone to see. And then the hammer behind it. So if you violate COMA, any one of these can happen, and any combination of these can happen. So the government can step in, the state attorney general, and reverse a decision. So if it feels like you all violated COMA in rezoning a piece of land, they can unrezone that and take it back to the original. Or if they feel like you violated it and not zoning something, someone can ask them to force the zoning. That would be really rare, but again, they can force you to make a decision or undo a decision. They can fine the city $500 per violation, and they can fine each of you $500 per violation. So just be aware of that. They can make you or the city pay court costs and attorney's fees for taking out this action against the city. They can invalidate your action, or they can just pull you out of office if it was egregious enough. So there are teeth to COMA. Don't violate it.
Your role in this is if there is a accusation of violated, Spencer's group is the one that has to try to defend you.
Yes, so that's part of our job. Is I don't just come here and give you advice on motions. If the state came at you all with a COMA violation, we would be there to defend you. So again, you guys have an attorney. Another reason you're welcome to call me if you feel like there was a COMA violation. Let me know so I'm aware. I would rather hear it from you guys or staff than the Attorney General's office. I don't have a lot of friends over there. Okay, prejudging applications. This one's really easy. Just don't do it. Keep an open mind. I don't really need to discuss it too much, but don't make up your mind before meetings. Don't tell people how you're leaning. I know you're going to want to tell your neighbors, like, hey, don't worry, this isn't going to pass. For the love of God, don't do that. If the applicant comes and talks to you, just disclose that at the meeting and say, hey, this applicant, this developer, this engineer came and talked to me and told me their ideas. Disclose that to everybody, and that takes out that appearance of impropriety, and it lets you get on the record that, hey, I heard from them, but it has not affected my decision. And if you feel like it's affected your decision, or they've told you something that you can't vote openly either way or another, disclose that and just say, I'm going to abstain from voting here. And that's okay. You don't have to vote on something that you don't feel like you can vote on. So if the applicant comes to you and says, if you don't rezone this, I'm suing the city, and you feel scared that a no vote is going to give me too much work and the city's going to pay me too much in legal fees, abstain from voting and say, I can't make an impartial vote. So real quick, there's a difference between abstaining and recusing. So in an abstention, you are still part of that discussion. You're still sitting up here listening, and you can talk. Although if you know you're going to abstain beforehand, I would recommend talking less. A recusal is you get up and leave the room for the hearing and the discussion and the vote. So once the public hearing starts, you get up, you walk out, and we come get you when the vote is over. You are not part of it at all. So if you have a conflict of interest, if you work for the engineering firm that's bringing forward the application and you're in that practice group, recuse yourself. If you work for that engineering firm and you're not part of the practice group, just let us know, and we can help you decide if it's an abstention, recusal, or nothing, and just disclose that and say, hey, the applicant is my best friend. Okay, well, maybe you should abstain if you're not going to vote fairly, if you're too good of a friend for that. If you don't have a conflict but you just don't feel comfortable voting, that's an abstention. You can do that. But just don't abuse that. You are here sometimes to make uncomfortable decisions. Sometimes that really stinks for you guys, and you're going to get a lot of people angry at you. Very rarely is there, especially the big rezonings, very rarely are everybody in favor of it. You're going to get some comments, you're going to get some flack, but that's part of the public service that you're all here for. So please don't abuse the concept of abstention just to duck out of pressure. Recusal does affect our quorum numbers, so if we're low on members, if there's 4 of you here and one of you recuses, we don't have a quorum anymore, so that makes it tougher. Abstention's a little different, so that won't affect it too much, so you don't have to worry about that with abstention. So that is it for my training. Any questions, any comments, any conversations?
Thank you.
Thank you guys for having me. Cool.
So you mentioned the
Yeah.
comp plan, the last one was approved in 2014. So you said that it's gonna come up in the next couple of years. Doesn't it have to be next year, 2024?
So staff will probably, I mean, have you guys talked over how you're starting? I don't want to get too far in the woods and ahead of ourselves. I will say the comp plans take a long time to do, and it will take probably more than a year to start it and finish it. No.
I'll have the amendments by tomorrow, and we'll have it on the next meeting agenda. That's what they pay me for. No, it does take a process. It depends on how it's approached, quite frankly. The good thing about the comprehensive plan that you do have here, many of the goals and elements that are the basis of this current comp plan have long-term livability. They are really quite good, some of the goals and everything, and you're still in a growth scenario, so a lot of what was discussed in 2014 is still kind of applicable today in that sense. It's the future land use map and some of the other details that are in there as to direction we're going. So for instance, at one time, east of I-35 was really envisioned as more of an industrial commercial area. Obviously, the attitude of the community has changed about that over the last 10, 15 years, and now it's more in that residential vein and things like that. So when it comes to future land use, there's elements like that where community attitude has shifted, and developments have been approved, like the Grata development for residential development, that now changes that element of how we look at the east side. And so when we're doing that, the benefit we have currently, or the situation we have currently, is that whole area is not annexed in the city yet, so we don't have jurisdiction over it. But yet we do need to look at our comp plans and sit there and say, okay, as we annex, as we're doing this, what are we really working towards out here? So those items are going to come up. It has been a matter of, okay, if we look at this more as an amendment process versus a complete rewrite, and that's the element of this. Either way, there will be public elements that we'll have with either public hearings or public forums on the discussion and the review of elements, but how much detail we go into, I'm not convinced yet that we have to do a complete overhaul rewrite. I do know that there are components that are outdated that we are, needing to change and adjust based on attitudes adjusting in the community and things like that. So staff is talking about it. One of the elements you have there, it either takes staff resources or consultant resources and financial resources to do these types of items. So generally, you're looking at trying to get it scheduled into a biennial budget first, since we do a 2-year budget. Then what approach are we taking? Going to hire more staff to do some of this long-range components, or are we going to go ahead and get a consultant and run them through this process, and how much do those cost? So that's kind of where staff is now. We know we have an aging comp plan, but we're very comfortable still that the goals are relatively applicable, the big principles of it, and knowing that it's a guide is giving us this time to kind of sit here and let's evaluate what's that next approach that we should be going with when we look at this. Gardner's got it's a dynamic area right now all around us. We recently had a Supreme Court case. I say recently, it's been about a year now, a little over a year, since the Supreme Court ruling threw out all our annexation agreements with our adjacent communities, and they did that for all of Kansas. It was very nice of them to do that. Makes our lives for planning a lot more difficult, because those annexation agreements really set kind of our growth limits and how we were interacting with Olathe and DeSoto were the two primary ones that we had agreements with. Those were all tossed out by the Kansas Supreme Court, so now it's been kind of the Wild West on annexation. What are we interested in? How do we deal with this? What are we going to do? What if Olathe gets there first? Now what? So that's changed some things for us dynamically in what we're doing. Whereas before it was real easy in the comp plan to say this is our agreement line, so we know we're going to this half-mile or quarter-mile east of Clare Road, and we have an agreement with the other community. They're not coming over that line, we're not going over that line. Well, now, not so much.
So why were you thrown out?
This was a challenge between Spring Hill and Olathe, actually, that occurred, and Spring Hill, let's just put it this way, it was an economic development situation where there was a potential large employer slash, I'm not gonna call it industry, commercial user, and Spring Hill wanted to annex the property up, and it was in Olathe's area, and Spring Hill didn't like that fact and challenged the agreements that they had signed with Olathe. And Supreme Court basically said you can't hold future councils to agreements that previous councils had made, and tossed them. So now we're saying that, and that is the, I mean, I'm just giving you a very glossed over. There's a lot of detail in that, but it essentially that's
Lawyers
what
don't
the
make
outcome
things
was.
easy, so there's a lot of detail.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's very interesting to watch, and what is nice is right now I have a very good working relationship with Olathe staff. Part of that's because of my career in Kansas City area. I know several of the people. It's scary how many planners I know in the metro area, or that know me anyway. So I previously, with part of my contract work, I was an interim director at Olathe, and so I know a lot of staff. So it's very easy for me to call them up, both in public works and that. And we, at the staff level, we work together. We try to figure the technical details out about where things are going. Policy level is a little bit more difficult. That involves city managers and councils and things like that. So, you know, we try to do the best we can on the staff level to come to agreements or look at things in a logical manner from the planning and perspective of utility and infrastructure provision primarily is what we're looking at. So, the relationship with Edgerton is the gentleman that's in charge of development services right now. When I was at Olathe, was a planner at Olathe, so we get along real well. The staff levels are it's amazing, the staff level cooperation that goes on with the county and the various jurisdictions in the immediate area here is very good. It really is. We talk constantly when there's proposals back and forth that we see impacting the adjacent community and things like that. So we are part of that information sharing, but obviously I work for Gardner. That person works for Edgerton, and there are times that I'm enforcing policies that may not be something the adjacent community wants or likes, but my job is here. And it's the same for him, and we respect that. We know when we're in those situations. So we respect the fact that the policymakers are the ones that make the policies. We follow those policies, but we also know we have to have a cooperative relationship to get things done. And I will say, with all of it is, at the end of the day, we're concerned how are citizens being impacted. That's the real test for us. How does this proposal adjacent to a residential area or adjacent to an industrial area, how does this impact the residents and future residents of that area? So we're all cognizant of it. It works very, very well. That doesn't mean that sometimes we don't get a little angry with each other, because we're arguing for our position at the same time. I say arguing, we're discussing our positions.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Senator.
Does the commission have anything else? I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion to adjourn by Commissioner Ham, second by Ginneman. Any discussion? All in favor?